So, first of all, just to welcome you all here to this latest Thinking Centre event, and I'm delighted we have people here, and there'll be room to ask questions after, afterwards as well. So, just to then get started, I'm privileged and honoured to have our two speakers um, who I think have extraordinarily important information to share because it's a sort of a mystery to me, having witnessed and experienced what life was like during the Cold War when everybody was terrified of the uh, nuclear threat. And even when we were living in the States, my children at school were shown how to hide under the desks. So it was a very topical fear at that point in time. For some reason, that seems to have dissolved to a large extent. And that concerns me because some of the sort of hysterical comments that are made by some of the leaders in the European Union, and of course in other areas as well, is a bit concerning. And I was also very concerned that one of our Irish ministers uh, spoke, I felt, quite recklessly 2 years ago on a radio interview, and I'll come back to that later on. But in any case, just to interview or to describe our two speakers. So, Dr. Ivana Hughes is the director of Frontiers of Science program at Columbia University in the United States. Additionally, Dr. Hughes serves as president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, an organization that educates and advocates for a world free of nuclear weapons. She has been a faculty member at Columbia University since 2008 and was awarded the Lenfest Distinguished Columbia Faculty Award for 2020. And then Dr. Steven Starr is the former director of the University of Missouri's Clinical Laboratory Science Program. He has worked with the Swiss, Chilean, and Swedish governments in support of their efforts at the United Nations to eliminate thousands of high alert nuclear weapons. For 10 years, he has taught the class Nuclear Weapons, Environmental Health and Social Effects at the University of Missouri. Dr. Starr is also an associate of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. So, from what I understand, how this is going to start is that Dr. Ivana and Dr. Stephen are going to use some slides and to do presentation, and maybe now would be the time to start that.
Okay, let me share my screen with y'all. Can y'all see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I thought it'd be important to begin with a discussion of what the current nuclear arsenals are like and what they can do. We see pictures of mushroom clouds sometimes, but we don't really understand the difference in the size of the weapons that are being used. On the bottom left corner, you can see the Hiroshima atomic bomb that we dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. It had a power of, or explosive power of 15 kilotons. A kilo means 1,000, so this is 15,000 tons of TNT explosive equivalent. Now, in the middle, there's a Russian 800 kiloton thermonuclear warhead. That's a modern weapon. Russia has several hundred of those at launch ready status that they can launch in a matter of a few minutes. I tried to make these images to scale just so you can see the difference in size. On the right is an image of a bomb that Russia tested in 1961 called the Tsar Bomba. and it had an explosive power of 57,000 kilotons. 1,000 kilotons is called a megaton, but I'm trying to use the same unit so you have an idea of how the scale. Now, the Hiroshima bomb, this is a picture of the Trinity detonation they did in the desert in the United States before. But that was from a number of miles away. That photo was taken. Hiroshima looked like this before it was detonated above it, several thousand yards above the city. And then this is what it looked like 6 months later. A firestorm burned down 15 square kilometers of the city. To give you a little bit better idea, these are American soldiers in the desert in Nevada that were required to witness some nuclear tests. And they were 7 miles away from a 22 kiloton atomic bomb. This is about the same size as the bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki. Now, this is 90 miles away from the 57,000 kiloton bomb.
Карта излечения все продолжается. В этом опыте она длится необычайно долго.
The base of the explosion where those clouds are is probably 60 to 80 kilometers across. So there's an enormous difference in scale. So today, Russia has deployed 100 megaton or 100,000 kiloton warheads on its Poseidon nuclear drone torpedoes. There's an image of the drone at the bottom of the man standing there. You can get an idea of the size. These torpedoes can go 115 miles per hour. Sorry, I can't convert that to kilometers per hour, but it's faster than any American torpedoes that can be sent to intercept it. If it detonates, it'll create a fire zone of somewhere between 15,000 to 17,000 square kilometers. It would probably be detonated at the bottom of a bay, so the fireball would be a little bit smaller than it was if it was at the surface. It would also create an immense radioactive tidal wave. Russia has these drones deployed on Belgorod subs. There are 3 of these subs that are now deployed and operational. I'll give you an idea. I thought you might understand it better if I use local geography. So this is an image of a firestorm created over Dublin, 13 square kilometers. Now, this is the same firestorm on the left compared to the firestorm that would be created by a 100 megaton or 100,000 kiloton weapon. So, what is a nuclear firestorm? Well, at the moment of detonation, the fireball appears from an 800 kiloton weapon. It would be about a mile in diameter. It would be hotter than the surface of the sun, and anything beneath it would be vaporized. It would instantly set fires over tens or hundreds of square miles, hundreds of square kilometers. In tens of minutes, all the fires would merge and form one gigantic fire. Hurricane-force winds would blow in towards the center of the fire zone, and it'd be enough to uproot trees that are 3 feet in diameter. The air temperatures in the fire zone would quickly rise to above the boiling point of water, 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So no one in that fire zone would survive. If you're in a deep shelter, the oxygen would be used up and you'd probably heat to the point of being baked. So that's, if you're in the fire zone and a bomb like that goes off, then you're not going to survive. That's one bomb. So if you can imagine a war fought with hundreds of thousands of these bombs, then you can understand this kind of the scale with hundreds of thousands of square miles on fire instantly within an hour. So now I'll let Ivana describe our current nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, so part of the problem, of course, is as Stephen described that these nuclear weapons, which we've developed 2 types of nuclear weapons. You'll sometimes hear the term atomic bombs and then hydrogen bombs. Atomic bombs are like Hiroshima, the ones that were initially developed. The hydrogen bombs are the ones that got us into these megaton ranges in terms of energy yields. But that's just one piece. They're very, very, very powerful. The other piece is that we have so many of them. And in particular, the United States and Russia have the world's largest arsenals, both at over 5,000 nuclear warheads. China has increased its arsenal in recent years and is now estimated to have about 600 nuclear warheads. The others are all in the couple hundred range. France has begun, you might have heard this announcement from President Macron that he was not only offering the Europeans to be under the French nuclear umbrella, he was also talking about France increasing the size of its arsenal. This is in addition to previously already previous decisions to modernize the French nuclear arsenal and to have operational nuclear weapons to the year 2090. So this is, how these people are thinking we're going to have these weapons forever. And of course, as we'll present, the problem there is, if we have them forever, where something's going to go wrong and we're not going to be around forever. So again, India and Pakistan at just under 200. The number for Israel is probably the one with the biggest question mark. Some people think that Israel must have at least on the order of 200 nuclear warheads. They certainly have that material for that many nuclear warheads, but the number 90 is what people have been estimating. And then North Korea has in this century been the only state to acquire nuclear weapons, and that's estimated at about 50 nuclear warheads. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So again, as Steven showed, some of these weapons are extremely, extremely powerful. And in the US and Russian arsenal, many of the weapons, and in particular the ones that are considered the strategic nuclear weapons, so these are the ones that are going to go both far away and that have high energy yields, many of them are basically, they're on the order of 10 to about 100 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. So if we can go to the next slide. And so we are all aware that nuclear weapons are so special because in addition to actually just creating a lot of energy, creating that blast and heat, they also create radiation, but that is not the only impact that they would have. In fact, it is estimated that even in what people refer to as a limited regional nuclear war between, let's say, those countries like India and Pakistan with those relative to the United States and Russia small arsenals, it is estimated that this would lead to something called nuclear winter. So what am I talking about? We are talking about a nuclear war in which these warheads are used on specific targets, whether that's military installations, cities, whatever, places and things that can burn, where the fires would spread very, very widely, as Stephen was showing you some of the areas that would be completely burning. And those fires would cause so much soot that would go into the atmosphere that it would block incoming sunlight and reduce temperatures globally around the planet very, very significantly. If we are talking about a US-Russian nuclear war, and the estimate there is that each side uses about 1/3 of their current arsenals. We're looking at cloudless sky at noon. I just, everything is the sunlight is blocked, and the freezing temperatures basically are happening around the planet and continue for a number of years. This would lead to vegetation quite simply not being able to grow. We need sunlight for things to grow on this planet. once vegetation is not growing, food production begins to fail and people begin to starve. So next slide, please. So this slide is actually showing, this is coming from a study that was published in 2022 from scientists at Rutgers University, Alan Robach, Lily Gia, and colleagues. This is about, in the left column, you see this amount of soot. So how much soot these fires produce. And the example, the row in the middle of 37 teragrams, doesn't matter, the millions of tons of soot produced, that scenario is for this limited regional nuclear war between India and Pakistan, where the number of direct victims, so this is people in cities who would die from those attacks of, say, 150 nuclear warheads being used by India on Pakistan and vice versa. We're looking at on the order of 130 million people dying in those attacks. The bottom two scenarios with 150 teragrams of foot, those refer to this US-Russia nuclear war. Again, about 1/3 of each country's arsenal ends up being used. And this is just from the attacks themselves. This is from people who die, who are vaporized, who die in the fires, who die from the blast. That's just literally the day of the deaths, the day of the attacks. And then if you can go to the next slide, now what we're looking at is the number of people who would starve in the aftermath of this nuclear war. So in any given row, that's the scenario. So again, in the middle, we're looking at 37 teragrams of foot, and we see over 2 billion people dying. So this is people around the world. It's the war between India and Pakistan doesn't just impact India and Pakistan. It will have global impacts. At the bottom, you see that the US-Russia nuclear war results in over 5 billion people dying of starvation. And what I'm just going to tell you is that this study, when the scientists did their modeling and studies and simulations, what they were doing is they were actually using the total worldwide population of 7 billion people. As you probably know, we now have more than 8 billion people. So you can pretty much add to that last column 1 billion for each of the scenarios. So we're looking at a US-Russian nuclear war at over 6 billion people dying. I mean, if this doesn't bother you and you don't think that this is absolute insanity. Anyway, next slide, please. And I think that's you.
That's me. Well, I have to wonder what the leaders in the United States and Europe are thinking about, because they don't seem to be deterred from threatening war with Russia. Both Putin and Trump, the presidents of the United States and Russia, are constantly followed by what they call the nuclear briefcase. Oh, if they're in the Kremlin or in the White House, they don't need that. They can be accessed anytime. But if they're out of the White House, a military officer carrying the briefcase accompanies them. And this is like an automated communication device that they can open up and within 1 minute give the order to attack. It's a permission order that's relayed to the National Command Authority. They select between one weapon or thousands of weapons. It only requires at that point only about 5 to 15 minutes for the U.S. and Russia to each launch 800 to 1,000 strategic nuclear weapons. Well, these weapons will be delivered by intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have about a 30-minute flight time if you're going from the U.S. to Russia or from Russia to the United States. They have submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Our Trident subs can carry 24 missiles, I believe, now. It's limited. But if you put a sub off the coast of the United States or Russia, say off the east coast of the U.S., it can hit Washington in as little as 7 minutes. Same with Moscow. Now, once the missiles are launched, they can't be recalled. And if an attack from a submarine-launched ballistic missile is detected, the president can have only 30 seconds to decide to launch. It takes about 3 minutes for the launch to be detected and confirmed. Then there's a 30-second conference with the president, assuming you can reach him. Let's see, sorry. The president orders a nuclear attack if he chooses to. And then it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to give and transmit the launch order. At that point, the launch officers and the launch silos will take about 2 minutes for the ICBM to launch and for it to clear the silo. And if the order is given to U.S. subs, then it takes about 15 minutes for the submissile to launch. The U.S. always keeps at least 4 subs at what they call hard alert status in position to launch. If this warning of attack was false, you've started a nuclear war by accident. And that might be easier than you think these days because there's not much trust left. Now, one thing that's amazed me is that the idea that European leaders and neocons can think that they can fight a war with Russia when we actually have no air defense systems that can intercept Russian hypersonic missiles. That's been shown to be true in Ukraine. Russia now has a Satan II Sarmat ICBM that carries the Avangard warhead. These travel at Mach 20, which is about 6 kilometers per second. You can't target that. It can also fly over the South Pole. U.S. radar is not directed towards the South Pole currently, and it's immune to any U.S. missile defense. So we wouldn't even see the attack coming, and if we could, we wouldn't be able to stop it. Now, the United States and Russia are constantly on alert. We have the NORAD command center. This is what it looks like down inside the bunker. Russia also has the command center. So everybody's watching and waiting. This goes on 24 hours a day. It's pretty much hidden from public view and public knowledge. It's not something that's really discussed very much in the United States. My students at the university didn't seem to know anything at all about nuclear weapons the last several years. And I just have to ask, do U.S. leaders believe they can win a nuclear war? And my feeling is that nuclear war is the ultimate crime against humanity. And so we must prevent it. I mean, well, that's my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Yeah, that's quite extraordinary. Do you want to present anything further, Ivana, or no? Sorry, Ivana,
You're
you're muted.
on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry, I muted myself earlier. Yeah, no, maybe I should just add that, of course, we've been in the nuclear age for 80 years, right? And in addition to the attacks on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there have been over 2,000 nuclear explosions, really all around the world. Most of them were conducted by the United States. The United States conducted what is referred to as nuclear tests, but they weren't, they were full blown that you saw the Russian or the Soviet Tsar Bomba video. These were full blown nuclear explosions. So over 1,000 of them by the United States and another about 1,000 from all the other nuclear armed possessors. And, people often, I think, erroneously think that, we've been in this nuclear age for 80 years. It's only happened, twice that they've been used. So surely things are okay. And, maybe even this sort of notion of nuclear deterrence or the fact that nuclear weapons keep us safe has really infiltrated the general public's minds, understanding, awareness. And so even very well-meaning people sort of dismiss efforts to abolish and eliminate nuclear weapons, as Stephen and I advocate for, by saying, maybe they've helped us, stay away from World War III. I'm now not so sure that we're staying away from World War III. That's point number one. But point number two is that throughout this nuclear age, not only have we had all those explosions that, by the way, have had absolutely devastating consequences, obviously for the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also for so many communities that were impacted by this so-called nuclear testing. But in addition, we have had dozens of close calls. The primary examples are from the United States, just because those examples have been revealed through declassified documents and so on. But we do know that there were close calls related to other nuclear weapon states as well. And really, what that body of literature and research shows is that we have been very, very lucky. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. People might know and recall that the Cuban Missile Crisis was this very, very serious confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, President John F. Kennedy on one side, Nikita Khrushchev on the Soviet side. But what's less well known is that in addition to that kind of deliberate, both leaders being under pressure actually from people in their administration, their leadership circle, being under pressure to begin deliberately a nuclear war or a war with the other party. In addition to that, there were sort of incidents during that Cuban Missile Crisis that could have led to a kind of accidental sort of stumbling into nuclear war, including the U.S. trying to sort of enforce a blockade, and so using something called depth charges to sort of bother a Soviet submarine that was already in the Caribbean, and the Soviet submarine, three officers thinking they were under attack, and all three, that submarine had nuclear warheads, and they were, just moments away from deciding to use a nuclear warhead on the United States. And one of the three officers said, no, we should go up to surface and see what's going on and not fire. And had, two out of three wanted to fire, the third person didn't. His name was Vasil Arkhipov. And had he done it, none of us would be here. I mean, that nuclear war in 1962 would have quite literally wiped out humanity, and certainly human civilization. That's one example of kind of well-known one. There were others. There were, false alarms with, for example, 1983, there was a NATO exercise that the Soviets interpreted, it was called Able Archer, that the Soviets interpreted for the real thing, because NATO had sort of upped how realistic the exercise was going to be. There was another, detection by a Soviet officer who was monitoring these signals for incoming missiles. And because of an alignment between clouds and satellites, it appeared as if the US had sent 5 incoming missiles towards the Soviet Union. And this other officer named Stanislav Petrov decided not to pass that message on to his superiors, because he had the instinct, the intuition that if the United States were really to attack the Soviet Union, they would do it with a lot more than 5 incoming missiles. But someone else might not have come to that conclusion. Had the Soviets, responded thinking they were just responding to an attack, right? They would have started a nuclear war. The U.S. would have responded, and again, none of us would. It's very unlikely any of us would be here today. So again, just to sort of stress that, the continued possession of these enormous arsenals of these absolutely horrific, catastrophic weapons really represents a kind of existential threat to our planet. The efforts to eliminate them have been long-standing. Clearly, we haven't quite achieved the goal, but the good news is that in 1986, we actually had on the order of 70,000 nuclear warheads. So we showed you a global arsenal of about 12,500 nuclear warheads. So we've actually made some progress. That's the good news. It's just that we really have to go all the way down. All the way down to zero. That's the only way to ensure that we're not going to blow ourselves up. And so what I want to just add and really commend you and your successive governments. So Ireland has really been one of the leaders on nuclear disarmament, starting with efforts in 1958 it's something that was called the Irish Resolution. This was initiated by the Foreign Minister Frank Ivana back in 58, and that led to basically negotiations for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was negotiated in 1968 and entered into force in 1970. Actually, the 11th review conference for that treaty is going to happen in New York next month. And so Ireland was actually the very first country to sign and ratify the NPT. So it's really seen as a leader in these spaces. And it's also a state that's playing a critical role in another treaty, which is called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So that's a more recent treaty that was negotiated in 2017 and it entered into force in 2021. But that's a treaty that aims to really eliminate all nuclear weapons. The NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, has different goals. But the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, really aims to ban, prohibit, abolish all nuclear weapons. So why don't I stop there?
No, that's really interesting, and I'm really glad you mentioned about Ireland's positive contribution there. And what I was just as listening to both of your presentations, and Stephen, I think you mentioned that in the last 7 years, even the American universities didn't seem to be too interested in these dangers. And what I was thinking was, back at the time of the Cuban crises, apparently John F. Kennedy was surrounded by quite a lot of unusual generals, and they were wanting, I think it was either 100 or 1,000 nuclear warheads to be sent to Russia and literally obliterate Russia with an early strike. And of course, Kennedy realized that these people were quite insane. But if it hadn't been Kennedy and maybe some other president, that mightn't have happened. But what I was wondering was, obviously back then, those generals anyway must have had no understanding of the power of those and the effects it would have had on world climate and the world at large. And I know maybe so back then they must have been ignorant of that to a large extent, just like the American universities, it seems, have been a bit ignorant of the danger even in the last 7 years. But what I was wondering was, I mean, there is at the moment this situation where the Americans and the Israelis attack Iran. And now it's been acknowledged that Iran, we don't know which side are actually going to win. But what we do know is that if Israel started to lose, well, then they might consider it an existential threat. And the question is, would Netanyahu then resort to using some of their nuclear warheads, which is probably quite likely he would, because when Golda Meir, the Israeli president back in 1972, was asked if Israel came on under the threat of the existential threat, would she use nuclear weapons? And she said without hesitation. So what I'm wondering then is, and this leads me to my question, is it that Trump and whoever is surrounding him are they totally unaware of the danger in any deep sense of a nuclear war breaking out, given that they surely would know if Israel does come under existential threat, they will probably use a nuclear weapon? Is it that they are completely, and Trump is completely ignorant of this, and maybe a lot of other European leaders as well? Or what's your opinion on that?
Well, I would say historically, military leaders have been almost unconcerned about the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war. It was always a mystery to me why we would build up an arsenal of 70,000 nuclear weapons when it was known in the 1950s that several hundred of them would be enough to destroy the United States or the Soviet Union. I think they seem to look at these weapons as big conventional weapons. So there's a fundamental failure to understand the nature of a nuclear detonation there. When I was at the United Nations in, I think it was 29 or 2010, yeah. I wormed my way into a side panel where there was the representatives from the State Department and a general, Air Force, who were engaged in they have a thing that they have occasionally in the United States where they have a nuclear review of the nuclear doctrine, and they were going through that. So I was able to ask them a question: were they aware of the environmental consequences of nuclear war? And the general said, "Well, I've never heard of anything like that." And the State Department guy just said, "Well, we're concerned with what Congress tells us to be concerned about." So I think that's when you come to Trump and the neocons. Well, Trump is illiterate, basically. I mean, he gets his information from TV, and I don't think he has any comprehension of, but when Reagan saw the day after movie on TV, and that prompted him to, move to work with Gorbachev to try to actually eliminate nuclear weapons. So there have been instances where there have been leaders that woke up, but the military. One of the scientists, Dr. Toon, told me, he said, well, and he was one of the authors of the nuclear winter studies. He said the military is tasked with destroying the enemy, and if it happens to destroy the rest of humanity, well, that's kind of too bad. I think that's sort of a military outlook. So I don't think that there's any comprehension at all. I don't see any reflection of it in the actions of the leaders in Europe and the United States, who are constantly pushing towards war with Russia. I mean, the United States has been directing the attacks within Russia for some time now. The generals at Wiesbaden Air Force Base, New York Times admitted that they direct the Ukrainian military. We provide all the targeting information we get from our satellites. We provide the weapons, and they're so the Ukrainians might push the button, but we're hitting Russian refineries, strategic nuclear. We had the British were involved too when the attack on the strategic bombers recently with drones. The drones hit the Russian early warning systems. Something like 3 of the 10. They have ground-based radar that they use for their nuclear early warning. So under the Russian doctrine, that actually justifies a nuclear response. Now Putin is not. He has not retaliated against any of the NATO or anybody. The attacks have always been directed at Ukraine, and I believe that the fools in the White House and Europe seem to think, well, he won't attack. We can make Russia back down. When you have Estonia threatening to attack Russia, I mean, there's more people in St. Petersburg than in some of those Baltic states. So it's almost like it'd be kind of funny if it was a satire movie, like Peter Sellers and The Mouse That Roared or something like that. But it's just, it's not funny because now the British are intercepting Russian ships on the high seas. I mean, they're helping with well, not the British, but the Estonian Navy. I think they passed a law allowing them to do that. So there's always aggressive actions that are taking place against Russia. And when Trump gets Putin on the phone for a phone call and drones are sent to assassinate Putin at his official headquarters, I don't even know why Putin will accept a phone call from Trump anymore. But that's the kind of situation we're in where there seems to be incredible, you could say that it's a loss of nuclear deterrence. And Russian nationalists are saying that in Russia. Some of them are saying, well, we need to use a nuclear weapon to show the Europeans that we will attack them. That's where we are now. So it's a really dangerous situation. And as far as Israel goes, the Samson option has been well known for a long time. But I think, any nation that has nuclear weapons that feels like its existence is at stake would probably likely use those weapons. Was the World Court or Court of International Justice had a ruling on that some years ago where they made sort of a caveat where they said, well, in those circumstances, it might be okay, which was unfortunate, I think. But that's a problem we still live with, that people believe in nuclear deterrence, yet a single failure of nuclear deterrence can lead to a nuclear war. So that's why we advocate the abolition of nuclear weapons. That's a
Eddie, if
long
it's okay for me to add,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so that's the International Court of Justice, the ruling about whether possession of nuclear weapons is legal. And they ruled that possession was okay, but using them would under most circumstances violate international humanitarian law. I'm with Pope Francis on this one, who actually said that the mere possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. So
Right.
I think he had that one, perfectly. On Trump, I so over the weekend, I actually, with another colleague, Professor Peter Kuznick, I published an article on whether Trump will break the nuclear taboo. So this is really the big fear right now with what's going on in Iran. That said, I want to just give Trump a tiny bit of credit. I don't think these days he deserves any credit for anything because he's really been making such a huge mess of the world. But the little bit of credit I will give him is that I actually think Trump, unlike some of the other presidents, as well as other current European leaders, actually does understand the nuclear war would be horrible. He has made statements that if you read some of his statements about nuclear weapons, you'd say, oh, yeah, Stephen or Ivana could have said this, right? Because he has said things like nuclear weapons are so horrible and they could destroy the world over and over and over again. And why are we spending all this money on them? And then he's even said, we want to see if we want to denuclearize. Well, guess what? If you really want to denuclearize, breaking international law at every turn, over the past year plus of his presidency is not going to help us get there. I mean, what's going to save us is respect for international law and a return to some kind of, normalcy in terms of how states relate to one another. So I think that's what's so crazy about Trump is I think when he came into office, one thing was that not it wasn't the only reason why he got elected, but I think many people, I didn't vote for him, but I know that many people did because he presented himself as the peace candidate. That's the
Right.
biggest tragedy of all of this. It's like I just sometimes I just want to say like and apologize for the American people who did on the whole elect him because I think so many got fooled by the promises of a peace president who was going to end the forever wars, who was going to end Ukraine on day one, who was going to, fix the Gaza problem and deal with Israel and solve it right away. all of this, right? And so he has come in and behaved completely differently.
Yeah.
And at this point, things are so bad that on the one hand, a little over a year ago, you might have even expected him to make some progress on this denuclearization. And now we're in this full spectrum with him of possible, I don't think it's coming, denuclearization, right? All the way to wondering, is he going to just decide to use a nuclear bomb on Tehran or somewhere else in Iran, maybe, the nuclear facilities, which would be, although of course I don't think anyone really knows where their enriched uranium is now. One thing I'll say about Israel, if it's okay, Israel is really kind of stands in a category of its own because they are the only country that has this undeclared nuclear arsenal. And the irony now is that it seems like Israel sort of, not only advocated for these attacks, in some sense, seems that they initiated them, fine. Trump, whether Trump went along or played more of a leading role, almost doesn't matter. Israel is heavily, heavily involved in, and Israel has an undeclared nuclear arsenal and is heavily involved in attacking another state that does not have nuclear weapons, right? Iran currently does not have nuclear weapons. Does Iran have highly enriched uranium? And could they have made, I mean, for decades they could have made nuclear weapons. They chose not to. I don't know what the current situation is, whether that, I'm not saying they will never develop nuclear weapons, because who knows what kinds of decisions they're going to make after whatever has been happening and whatever's coming next. But the irony really is for Israel with this, with its, unsanctioned, undeclared nuclear arsenal, to be the one attacking Iran.
It's very interesting what you've both said in that context. And of course, the focus has, in that particular context that you're referring to, was sort of on America and, of course, the current war with Iran. But in Europe, it seems to me there must be an extraordinary unawareness in European leaders of the fire that they're actually playing with. And even in our own country here, 2 years ago, the Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill, she was Minister of European Affairs at the time, I think, and she was interviewed on radio, and I heard the radio interview, and I was completely shocked. And what I did was to make sure I had heard clearly what her answers to the interviewer's questions were. I listened on playback, so verbatim then I had what had occurred. So I wrote to her, and without going on very much about the totality of my letter or my email, a section of it was, you see, she was asked by the interviewer, are you concerned that Sergei Lavrov, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Kremlin are saying if that were to be the case, in other words, they were talking about giving Ukraine weapons that could be shot into Russia itself. And that was what had preceded this question that he had asked, because she seemed to be not at all concerned that Ireland was at least verbally supporting that Ukraine should be given these weapons. But anyway, so are you concerned that Secretary Lavrov, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Kremlin are saying if that were to be the case, Russia would then have to look at their nuclear option position? She answered, we are not terribly interested in that Russian position at the moment. Now, that's how extraordinary her answer was. Now, there was a whole lot of other things in the interview that I wrote to her about. I sent that letter 2 years ago, or that email. I never got an answer. And then I sent it again, and I never got an answer. Because one of the questions I was asking her also was, is the Irish government, is this the position of the Irish government? And are the Irish government, that she was simply a member of, just speaking for herself, in agreement with her attitude and her position? So I got no answer. So I write a third time. And I also write to all the politicians in Ireland, and I share what I'd written to her. And I also write to all the ministers in her government, she being one of them, to answer my question. I get no answer. So what I'm basically saying is that one of the things that I've been absolutely shocked at the one-sided narrative that has existed in Europe and to a large extent in Ireland about the Ukraine Russian war. But if I was sitting down in a conversation over coffee with Jennifer McNeil, Carol McNeil, that minister, I would say, I just want to point out an implication you may not be noticing in your attitude. So, yes, a lot of people, probably yourself, Jennifer, are agreeing that Putin is another Hitler. That seems to be what comes out quite strong in conversations. But isn't it illogical? Let's assume then that he is another Hitler. Is it not illogical to provoke somebody who you believe is like a Hitler with provocation and a country and the leader of a country that has more nuclear weapons than any other country? Does that is there a lack of logic in your position that you're not noticing? Because what I do notice often, that the implications of things that people are doing or saying, they're not seeing the implications really. And that's something that really amazed me. I didn't think this type of one-sided, extreme narrative, without any, even the mainstream media go along with it. You see, it's to have happened in Ireland of all places, that has had this history of dialogue. I'm flabbergasted. So, and also just to mention, you see, the problem is that not only are people not aware of this danger that ye are so articulately pointing towards and sharing with us tonight, but people don't seem to want to become aware.